From the moment you first opened your eyes, something subtle yet powerful began weaving itself into the architecture of your perception. Long before you had language, before you recognized your own reflection, before you could distinguish between the sound of your heartbeat and the hum of the world around you, your mind was absorbing impressions, rhythms, expectations, and invisible shapes of meaning. You were not simply learning. You were being configured. The world did not wait for you to decide who you might become. It began sculpting you from the very beginning, imprinting its preferences, fears, limitations, and unspoken rules upon the blank expanse of your early consciousness. This is not a conspiracy of individuals, nor a malicious design drawn by any single entity. It is an inheritance of patterns, a lineage of thought forms stretching back through generations that did not pause to question whether the frameworks they passed on were truly aligned with freedom, truth, or inner sovereignty. They simply handed you the map they were given, the script they recited, the lens through which they have been taught to see. If one looks closely enough, one begins to notice that most people spend their entire lives acting out a story they never consciously wrote. Their desires are often borrowed. Their fears are echoes of someone else's trembling. Their ambitions shaped by the subtle gravity of cultural ideals rather than the quiet, tender pull of their own soul's longing. And in a sense, this is what it means for the mind to be hijacked. Not that someone's taken something from you violently, but that you were ushered into a world already in motion, already carrying an immense momentum of inherited interpretations. Before you knew what freedom was, your mind had already been given its definitions. Before you learned how to choose, you were shown what acceptable choices look like. Before you experienced the fullness of your inner landscape, you were subtly guided to focus only on certain regions of it, while others were labeled impractical, dangerous, or unnecessary. This hijacking is quiet, almost tender in its subtlety. It does not feel like theft. It feels like guidance. It arrives in the comforting tone of parents who want you to succeed, in the rigid structure of schools designed to shape you into a useful citizen, in the glittering images of society that tells you what a good life should look like. And yet, beneath all of this, there remains a deeper truth that few ever take the time to rediscover. The mind you carry today is not entirely your own. It has been built like a house whose foundations were laid long before you moved in. You have decorated the walls, placed furniture where it seems to fit, and added your own small touches. But the shape of the house, the architecture of thought, the corridors of belief, the hidden rooms of instinct was drawn by countless hands that were not yours. As you matured, the world taught you how to navigate the systems it had constructed. You learned the rules of success, the subtle politics of belonging, the delicate balancing act between conformity and individuality. You learned to interpret your emotions in socially acceptable ways, to speak in tones that would not disrupt the fabric of expectation, to desire what others seem to desire, because that is what made sense. The mind learned to adapt, and in doing so, it learned to forget its original sovereignty. It forgot that it had once been an open field, vast and untouched. It forgot that it once perceived reality through senses unclouded by interpretation. It forgot that before the world named things, you experienced existence directly, almost like a soft vibration of presence touching presence. But the time eventually comes, sometimes through crisis, sometimes through subtle restlessness, when a person begins to sense that something is missing. The life they are living, though seemingly complete, feels faintly misaligned, as though the deepest part of themselves were knocking gently from the inside, asking to be acknowledged. There is a moment, often quiet and unremarkable on the surface, when one realizes that so many of their decisions were made not from inner truth, but from inherited storylines. It is as if the curtain of the world shifts slightly and reveals that the stage upon which they have been performing was built long before they arrived. The roles were pre-written, the costumes pre-selected, the applause calibrated to reward conformity rather than authenticity. In that moment, the notion that the mind has been hijacked no longer feels dramatic. It feels obvious. It feels like remembering something you had sensed all along but could never articulate. And from this awareness emerges a new possibility. The possibility of reclaiming the mind, of freeing it from the networks of conditioning that once seemed immutable. This is not a rebellion of chaos, but a return to one's original nature, a reawakening to the silent intelligence beneath all the noise. It is the beginning of a journey that is both spiritual and practical, both cosmic in its implications and intimate in its unfolding. To take the mind back is not to reject the world, but to see it clearly, to distinguish between what was given to you and what truly arises from within. It is to remember that beneath the layers of social identity lies a consciousness untouched by manipulation, a presence that observes without distortion, a self that existed long before you learned your name. In this space, possibility opens like a doorway into an inner landscape you may have forgotten, a vastness waiting to be rediscovered. This introduction is the first step toward uncovering the mechanisms of this lifelong conditioning and toward reclaiming the sovereignty of your inner world. And so the journey begins not with a dramatic declaration, but with a gentle turning inward, a quiet acknowledgement that the hijacking is real and that liberation is possible. To understand how the mind is reclaimed, one must first understand the invisible architecture that shaped it. Every human being is born into a world of pre-existing narratives, and these narratives behave like gravitational fields, pulling attention, shaping perception, and defining what seems possible. They operate silently, like background radiation, always present, rarely acknowledged, yet profoundly influential. The core idea behind the notion that your mind has been hijacked is not that anyone has maliciously stolen it, but that you inherited a structure of consciousness that was already deeply conditioned long before you arrived. You were handed a lens and taught to believe it was your eyesight. One of the earliest and most powerful forces shaping the mind is the social need for belonging. From infancy, you learned that survival was tied to acceptance, and acceptance was tied to compliance. The adults around you rewarded certain behaviors and discouraged others, not because they sought to imprison your mind, but because they were themselves caught in the same web of expectations. Their fears became your fears. Their dreams became your standard for aspiration. Their unspoken anxieties became the silent rules that decided which parts of yourself you were allowed to express. This is the first theme. The mind learns to contract itself to fit into the contours of the world, and over time it forgets that it ever had the freedom to expand. A second theme arises from the way language forms the boundaries of experience. Language is a magnificent tool, yet it is also a cage made of symbols. The moment you learn a word, you also learn a limitation. Every label simplified the raw experience it represented, and while this helped you navigate the world with efficiency, also taught you to perceive reality in fragments instead of wholeness. Curiosity became categorized, emotions were sorted into good and bad, and the unknown was often framed as something dangerous. You inherited a mental dictionary arranged not by truth, but by tradition. The mind learned to live in the world of representation rather than the world of direct experience. And in doing so, it began to mistake its own interpretations for reality itself. A third theme appears in the way society defines success and value. Most people learn very early that their worth is measured by external metrics, grades, achievements, appearances, wealth, status. These metrics form a kind of psychological scaffolding, and over time they become the default settings for one's internal compass. Without realizing it, many people begin to chase goals that were never truly their own, driven not by inner calling but by external validation. The mind becomes a stage where societal ideals perform their scripts, and the deeper self remains backstage, unnoticed and uninvited. This kind of hijacking is subtle but powerful. By controlling what you strive toward, the world quietly shapes who you become. Another core concept lies in the interplay between fear and conformity. Fear is one of the mind's oldest teachers, and it is astonishingly effective. Fear teaches silence. Fear teaches obedience. Fear teaches the avoidance of anything that might provoke rejection. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply the fear of disappointing someone, the fear of being misunderstood, or the fear of appearing foolish. But when these fears accumulate, they form an internal authority more rigid than any external force. The mind becomes a careful negotiator, constantly scanning for risks, constantly weighing how to move safely within the matrix of expectations. In this way, fear becomes one of the primary architects of the hijacked mind. Then there's the illusion of separation, the belief that you are a solitary being navigating a world of competing forces, that you must fight for your place, assert your identity, protect your boundaries. This illusion creates a persistent tension. It shapes relationships, ambitions, and self-perception. It reinforces the idea that fulfillment is something to be gained from outside rather than awakened from within. When the mind accepts the illusion of separation, it also accepts the belief that it must constantly defend itself, constantly compare itself, constantly measure itself against others. This becomes another layer of conditioning, another silent mechanism guiding thought and behavior. Yet woven through all of these themes is a deeper truth. The mind is programmable, and what was once programmed by the world can be reprogrammed by awareness. Conditioning is powerful, but consciousness is infinitely more so. The hijacking is not permanent. It is simply unexamined. The moment one begins to observe the structures of conditioning is the moment those structures begin to dissolve. Awareness is not an escape from the world, but a reclamation of one's inner authority. By learning to witness the mind rather than blindly follow it, one begins to regain access to the deeper intelligence beneath all conditioning. The journey back to mental sovereignty involves recognizing these core themes not as enemies, but as inherited patterns waiting to be understood. They were never meant to be prisons. They were survival strategies passed down through time, shaped by environments that no longer exist. To reclaim the mind is to see these themes clearly, to understand their origins, and to recognize that you are not bound by them. You are the observer of the patterns, not the patterns themselves. And once the observer awakens, the hijacking loses its power. This section opens a doorway to the symbolic dimensions of this exploration, where the narrative of the hijacked mind can be illuminated through metaphor, allegory, and deeper storytelling that speaks not just to the intellect, but to the soul's knowing. Imagine for a moment that your life began in a vast, luminous garden, a place untouched by noise or expectation. In this garden, the air shimmered with possibility, and your consciousness, new, unshaped, vibrant, moved like a soft breeze across an endless field of awareness. You had no name, no story, no category to which the world could filter you. You experienced everything as it was, immediate, vivid, unfragmented. In this original state, perception was not a tool but immersion, not a lens but a total presence. This garden symbolizes the untouched mind, the sovereign consciousness unclaimed by the world. But as with many myths, this garden did not remain untouched for long. A gate appeared, not one you chose, but one fashioned by the world around you. Through this gate came visitors, parents, teachers, elders, society, culture, language. Each visitor arrived with gifts, offering seeds they believed you needed in order to grow. Some seeds were lessons in safety, others in belonging, others in ambition. Many were well-intentioned, others inherited from fear, still others shaped by ancient patterns of survival. You accepted these seeds because there was no reason yet to question them. You planted them in the soil of your mind, and they began to take root. Over the years, they sprouted into structures of meaning that shaped how you saw the world. And slowly, the garden changed. What started as an open field became a cultivated landscape. Pathways were drawn, fences erected, signs posted to direct your curiosity. Some areas were labeled aloud, others dangerous. Some trees were pruned to fit the aesthetic of the larger garden, others cut down entirely. What had once been wild and organic became controlled and carefully arranged. This transformation represents a gradual shift from original consciousness to conditioned mind. The hijacking was not violent. It was subtle. It took the form of guidance, discipline, tradition, and structure. But like any cultivated garden, it also imposed boundaries on your natural growth. One symbolic narrative often used in ancient traditions speaks of a mirror placed in the hands of a newborn soul. The mirror reflects truth perfectly. But as a child grows, dust begins to accumulate upon its surface. Each speck of dust represents a belief handed down, an expectation internalized, a fear absorbed, a role embraced. The mirror remains intact, but its reflection grows dimmer. Eventually, the child forgets that the mirror was ever clear. They begin to think the dust itself is a reflection, that the distortions are accurate representations of who they are. This mirror is the essence of consciousness, and the dust is conditioning. The hijacking is not the destruction of truth, but the obscuring of it. Another symbolic story speaks of a grand library. Imagine walking into an ancient hall filled with scrolls, each scroll containing a narrative about what you're allowed to be, think, desire, or fear. Some scrolls were written by your family, others by your culture, others by the silent rules of society. As a child, you wandered through this library guided by those around you, and they handed you certain scrolls to read. You accepted these scrolls because you trusted the hands that offered them. Over time, you read them so many times that you memorized them. Eventually, you forgot they were scrolls at all. You believed them to be the truth of your identity. But hidden in the vastness of this library is a locked chamber, rarely visited and often forgotten. Inside are scrolls you have never read, narratives written by your deepest nature, waiting for you to rediscover them. This chamber symbolizes your inner sovereignty, your unconditioned self, the part of you untouched by the hijacking. There is also the allegory of the shadow puppeteer. In this tale, a person watches shadows moving on a wall, mistaking them for real beings. The shapes dance, speak, and act out stories filled with drama and emotion, and the person believes these stories reflect the true world. But behind the scenes stand the puppeteer, manipulating the shadows with strings. The puppeteer is not a villain. Rather, it represents the accumulation of conditioning, unexamined beliefs, unconscious fears, societal pressures. The shadows symbolize the reactions and assumptions that arise automatically in the mind. When a person becomes aware of the puppeteer, they begin to reclaim their power. They realize that the shadows were not destiny, but echoes of learned patterns. They realize they can choose which puppets remain and which are released. This moment of awareness marks the beginning of liberation. One of the most powerful symbolic narratives is that of the inner traveler. The traveler journeys through a vast desert, carrying a heavy backpack filled with stones. Each stone represents a belief they were taught to hold. Be agreeable. Success means approval. Do not take risks. Stay within the boundaries. Dream smaller. Do not upset anyone. Be who they expect you to be. The traveler believed the backpack is essential for survival because everyone else they meet is carrying one. But one day, exhausted, the traveler collapses beneath the weight. In that moment of stillness, they open the backpack for the first time and discover that many of the stones are not theirs. Some belong to their ancestors, some to their parents, some to the fears of people who never knew them. As the traveler removes the stones, their body becomes lighter. The desert becomes less hostile. The horizon becomes more inviting. The traveler realizes that carrying those stones was never the requirement for belonging. It was simply the inheritance of unexamined weight. Reclaiming the mind often begins in the same way, by looking into the backpack of your beliefs and asking, which of these are truly mine? Each of these symbolic narratives illustrates a different dimension of the hijacked mind: the cultivated garden, the dust-covered mirror, the inherited scrolls, the shadow puppets, the backpack of stones. These symbols help make visible what often remains unseen. They reveal how conditioning operates not as an external force, but as an internalized architecture, and they point toward a profound truth. The original self is still present beneath all of this. The garden remains beneath the cultivated landscape. The mirror waits beneath the dust. The locked chamber still holds your forgotten scrolls. The shadows dissolve when the light is turned inward, and the traveler can remove as many stones as they are courageous enough to examine. In these narratives, the path toward reclaiming the mind becomes clearer. Freedom is not found in fleeing the world, but in seeing the world and yourself without the distortions of inherited stories. Liberation begins not with resistance, but with recognition. It begins with rediscovering the untouched garden within, the pristine mirror, the words you were born to write, the light behind the shadows, the freedom that exists when the unnecessary weight is set down. The symbolic stories reveal the architecture of conditioning. But for these insights to reshape a life, they must be integrated into the daily rhythm of existence. Awareness without embodiment remains a distant star, beautiful, inspiring, but too far away to warm the skin. The work of reclaiming the mind begins in the intimate space where thought meets experience, where habit meets choice, where the inner narratives encounter the living world. This is where transformation takes root, not as an abstract philosophy, but as a lived, moment-to-moment unfolding. Consider first the nature of attention. In many ways, attention is the most valuable currency you possess, though most people do not realize it. The world constantly competes for it. Advertisements, notifications, opinions, expectations. And every time attention is captured, a small piece of sovereignty is diverted. The hijacked mind is often a mind that has forgotten how to consciously direct its attention and instead allows external forces to seize it. Reclaiming the mind begins with learning to observe where attention goes, not with judgment but with clarity. When you notice that your thoughts have been pulled into fear, comparison, or mindless distraction, you are witnessing the mechanics of the hijacking in real time. The simple act of noticing begins to loosen its grip. The moment attention becomes a choice rather than a reflex, something shifts internally. A new kind of freedom begins to stir. Another arena of integration is the relationship with emotion. Many individuals inherit emotional narratives rather than discovering their own. They learn which emotions are allowed and which must be hidden, which can be expressed and which must be suppressed. Over time, people begin to fear their own inner life, mistaking emotional waves for threats rather than signals. But emotions are not enemies. They are messengers carrying information from the deeper self to the conscious mind. When a person allows themselves to feel rather than suppress, they begin to unravel layers of conditioning. A sudden anger might reveal a boundary that was crossed years ago but never acknowledged. A quiet sadness might point to a dream abandoned because someone once said it was unrealistic. A gentle joy might hint at a forgotten passion, waiting patiently for recognition. To reclaim the mind is to reclaim the full landscape of emotion, to listen to each feeling as though it were a trusted companion, guiding you back to your authentic self. Another practical dimension lies in recognizing the inherited narratives around identity. Most people speak about themselves using words that were handed to them. I'm not creative. I'm not good at speaking. I'm a shy person. I'm meant to follow the safe path. I'm the responsible one. I'm the one who must not fail. These identities feel true because they've been repeated for years. But repetition is not truth. It is simply conditioning reinforced over time. When one begins to question these identities gently, without the need for immediate answers, cracks begin to appear in the facade. Through these cracks, light enters, and in that light, new possibilities become visible. The mind begins to unlearn the boundaries it once believed were unbreakable. Daily life offers countless opportunities for integration. Every decision, no matter how small, becomes a site of reclaiming inner authority. The choice to rest when the world demands constant productivity. The choice to speak honestly when silence would be more comfortable. The choice to follow curiosity rather than habit. The choice to listen deeply rather than react automatically. Each small act is a vote for sovereignty, a quiet declaration that the mind is once again aligning with its original purpose. These choices accumulate like drops of water carving stone. Over time, they reshape the internal landscape, softening old structures and making space for new, more authentic ones to emerge. Relationships also become arenas for transformation. Many people enter relationships carrying scripts learned from their upbringing. The need to please, the fear of abandonment, the desire for approval, the dread of conflict. These scripts often dictate behavior long before awareness catches up. But when one begins to observe these patterns with compassion, a new kind of relationship becomes possible, one in which vulnerability replaces pretense, presence replaces projection, and connection becomes a conscious choice rather than a reenactment of childhood patterns. In this sense, relationships are mirrors that reflect the state of one's inner world. When the mind is reclaimed, relationships naturally shift from unconscious repetition to conscious co-creation. Another real-world implication is the shift in how one measures success. Society often teaches that success is external, wealth, status, accomplishments, recognition. But when a person begins reclaiming their mind, they gradually realize that true success has less to do with accumulation and more to do with alignment. A life aligned with inner truth feels radically different from a life lived in pursuit of external validation. Decisions become lighter. Work becomes more meaningful. The constant tension of competition and comparison fades, replaced by a grounded sense of purpose. This shift does not require abandoning ambition. Rather, it reorients ambition toward authenticity. One begins to pursue goals not because they impress others, but because they resonate with the deepest parts of the self. Creativity also undergoes a profound transformation. A hijacked mind often suppresses creativity because creativity threatens fixed narratives. But when those narratives are questioned, creativity returns like a forgotten friend. New ideas arise spontaneously. Intuition becomes more accessible. One begins to perceive solutions that were previously invisible because the mind was confined to inherited frameworks. This awakening of creativity has practical implications. It enhances problem solving, enriches professional work, deepens personal expression, and invites a sense of wonder back into daily life. Creativity becomes not an activity but a way of being, an ongoing dialogue with the unknown. Finally, reclaiming the mind influences one's relationship with time. Many people live with a constant sense of urgency, feeling as though life is slipping away, as though they are forever behind. This pressure is a byproduct of conditioning, a belief that worth is tied to productivity, that rest is indulgence, that slowing down invites failure. But when the mind begins to free itself from these narratives, a new perception of time emerges. Moments stretch. Awareness deepens. Time becomes a partner rather than an enemy. Instead of rushing through experiences, one begins to inhabit them fully. In this presence, meaning arises naturally, like a flame igniting in still air. Practical integration is, at its core, the process of living with eyes open rather than sleepwalking through inherited stories. It is a quiet revolution that turns awareness into action, insight into embodiment, possibility into reality. The journey of reclaiming the mind may begin in symbolism, but its true power unfolds in the living world, in how you breathe, speak, choose, and create each day. Every journey of awakening begins quietly, with a soft recognition that something fundamental has been forgotten. In the vast architecture of your life, beneath the noise of expectation, beneath the weight of inherited roles, beneath the practiced scripts you've been reciting for years, something essential has been waiting. It has watched you become who the world asked you to be. It has remained patient as you navigate the winding paths of approval, belonging, ambition, and fear. It has followed you through the cultivated garden, the dust-covered mirror, the library of inherited scrolls, the shadow puppet theater, and the heavy backpack of beliefs not your own. Through all of it, your original self, the sovereign, unconditioned mind, has waited for you to remember. This remembrance is not an epiphany of fireworks or sudden dramatic shifts. It is a slow, luminous dawning, like the first light creeping across a horizon after a long night. It begins with subtle questions that echo from somewhere deep within you. Who am I beneath the roles I perform? What part of my identity is truly mine? Where did my desires originate? When did I stop listening to myself? How long have I been living according to maps drawn by other hands? These questions are not signs of confusion, but signals of awakening. They mark the moment when the hijacking begins to lose its power, because the one who has been conditioned is finally becoming aware of conditioning itself. As you step back from inherited narratives, something remarkable happens. You begin to see your life not as a fixed story, but as an unfolding poem. You begin to understand that the mind you were given is not the mind you must keep. The beliefs you internalize can be questioned. The roles you inherited can be undone. The emotional patterns you absorb can be healed. The fears that guided you can be softened with compassion. The boundaries you once feared crossing can be walked through with gentle courage. And in this unfolding, you rediscover the vast, open garden that existed before the fences, before the gates, before the careful pruning of your natural curiosity. Reclaiming your mind is not a fight against the world, but a return to the quiet intelligence within you. It is a shift from reacting to life to consciously participating in it. When you see the architecture of conditioning clearly, you no longer move through life as though you are inside a scripted play. You become the author rather than the actor, the composer rather than the performer of someone else's melody. You begin to feel moments with a depth you have forgotten was possible. The taste of food becomes richer. The warmth of sunlight becomes more intimate. The presence of another person becomes more vivid. The sound of your own thoughts becomes something you listen to rather than obey. Life expands not outward but inward, revealing layers of meaning that were always there but hidden behind the constant hum of inherited expectation. With this clarity, your relationship to yourself transforms. You become less critical, less hurried, less defined by the need to prove something. The inner dialogue softens. The world no longer feels like a stage where you must earn your right to exist. Instead, it becomes a canvas where your presence itself is enough. This inner shift radiates outward, touching your relationships, your work, your creativity, your sense of purpose. You begin to see others not as competitors, judges, or mirrors of your insecurity, but as fellow travelers navigating the same labyrinth of conditioning. Compassion grows naturally from this recognition. It becomes a quiet, steady light guiding your interactions. In reclaiming your mind, you reclaim your time. The relentless urgency dissolves. You begin to experience moments rather than racing through them. You pause long enough to sense the pulse of your own being. You breathe more deeply, speak more authentically, choose more intentionally. Presence becomes not an exercise, but a way of living. And as presence deepens, so does intuition. You begin to sense a subtle guidance that has always been there, an inner compass pointing toward what nourishes you, what aligns with your truth, what expands rather than diminishes your spirit. This reclamation is not a final destination. It is a lifelong unfolding. The dust will return to the mirror from time to time. New stones will appear in the backpack. New shadows will dance on the walls. But once you have seen the mechanisms clearly, you cannot be fully captured by them again. Awareness becomes your shield, compassion your guide, authenticity your anchor. You begin to understand that freedom is not the absence of structure, but the ability to choose your relationship to it. You realize that the world does not lose its power when you awaken. Rather, your relationship to it becomes rooted in clarity rather than conditioning. The transformational call woven through this journey is not a demand, but an invitation. It asks you to turn inward with gentleness, to observe your mind with curiosity rather than judgment, to question the narratives you inherited with compassion rather than rebellion. It invites you to open the locked chamber in your inner library, to read the scrolls written by your own hand. It asks you to return to the wild garden within you, to remove the unnecessary stones, to clear the mirror, to shine a light behind the shadows. It calls you to step into the vast, uncharted landscape of your inner sovereignty. You are not being asked to overthrow your life or abandon everything familiar. You are simply being asked to inhabit your life more fully, to move from unconscious repetition to conscious creation. The world may continue offering its definitions, its expectations, its scripts, but you now have the clarity to choose which ones to accept. You can let go of what no longer aligns. You can nurture what feels true. You can design the architecture of your own inner world. You can return to the self that existed before the hijacking, not by rejecting the past, but by illuminating it with awareness. In the end, taking back your mind is an act of profound courage wrapped in profound tenderness. It is the moment you stop waiting for permission to be yourself. It is the moment you say, quietly but unmistakably, I am returning home to myself. And with that whisper, the old structures begin to dissolve. The garden opens. The mirror clears. The scrolls unfold. The puppets loosen their strings. The backpack lightens. And the sovereign mind, the one you were born with, steps forward at last, ready to guide you into a life shaped not by inherited limitations, but by your deepest truth.